She thought it was just a contract, until he whispered, 3 times. One night. What began as a transaction turned into something no one expected, not even him. If you enjoy quiet, powerful stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Now, let's begin. The mirror didn't lie. I looked like a bride, white silk draped down to my ankles, hair curled and pinned with pearls I didn't pick, makeup I didn't recognize. But the woman staring back? She wasn't me. Not Clara, the daughter who used to hum while stirring soup for her mother, the sister who once gave up her college offer to keep the lights on in a crumbling Brooklyn apartment. No, the woman in the psalm. Mirror was a trade, a quiet currency used to settle someone else's debt. The door creaked open behind me. "They're ready," said the woman from the wedding agency, not meeting my eyes. No one had, all day. I stood up. My knees wobbled beneath the weight of the dress. Or maybe it was the weight of everything else. The hospital bills still sitting unpaid, my mother's shallow breaths last night, the unopened letter from my father who hadn't called in years, and the man I was about to marry, Jonathan Hale. The name alone held weight in Manhattan's financial world. He was the cold-blooded CEO of Hale & Westwood, heir to an empire built on precision, silence, and steel-eyed decisions. He didn't need a wife. He needed an arrangement, a settlement. And I was the price. The wedding was held in one of his family estates. Long Island, of course. Not a church, not a garden, but a marble hall where sound echoed off high ceilings, and conversations were kept brief and polite. I walked in alone. No father to give me away. No music either, just the subtle hum of air conditioning and a chandelier above, dripping light like crystal tears. Jonathan stood at the end of the aisle, perfectly still, flanked by 2 stone-faced witnesses. He looked like a sculpture someone had forgotten to finish. Sharp jaw, tailored gray suit, eyes so unreadable they could be glass. I stopped 3 feet in front of him. He didn't reach for my hand. Didn't smile. Didn't whisper. Instead, he said evenly, "This isn't a vow. This is a rescue." My throat closed. No one else seemed to hear the way my breath trembled at his words. The officiant spoke quickly, efficiently. Papers were signed. Hands were never held. And just like that, I became Clara Hale. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. But somewhere deep in my chest, a little voice whispered, "You're not a wife. You're a signature on a dotted line." Later that evening, I found myself back in the bridal suite, alone. The silence in the mansion wrapped around me like gauze, soft, sterile, and suffocating. I opened the drawer of the antique vanity table. A small wooden box lay inside, my mother's. She had given it to me that morning, her fingers trembling as she tied the ribbon. "Something old," she whispered. Inside was a folded letter. I unfolded it with gentle hands, careful as if it might crumble. The handwriting was hers, elegant, slightly slanted. "Dear J.H., I never forgot what you did for us. You were just a boy then, but you kept your promise. Thank you for keeping it now. You once said you'd repay kindness when you had power. I didn't expect it would come like this. But I know you'll protect her. You were always meant to do good, in quiet ways." Ruthie stared at the initials. J.H. Jonathan Hale. Could it be? A memory tugged at me, faint and half-buried. Years ago, my mother used to tutor English for refugee children at the church down the street. I remembered a quiet boy with scuffed shoes and hands that trembled when he read aloud. My mother made him tea with honey and told me he was going to grow up to be someone important. Not because he was smart, but because he was kind. Deep down, Jonathan Hale. Could he be that boy? If he was, why hadn't he said anything? Why choose silence when there was so much that needed saying? I stood by the window watching the fog roll in from the garden. Somewhere down the corridor I could hear the muffled clink of glass. Jonathan, maybe. drinking alone in one of those perfect, lonely rooms. The world outside blurred in soft gray and silver. Somewhere in another life, I might have walked down a different aisle with love in my heart instead of duty in my chest. But that wasn't this life. This life was built on sacrifice. My mother's failing heart, my father's failure, my own quiet choices, made in the name of keeping us together. That was my vow. Not to Jonathan Hale, but to the woman who once sang lullabies in a Brooklyn kitchen while stirring lentils, whispering, that dignity wasn't about winning. It was about keeping your promises, even when no one else did. I touched the letter again, tracing the ink. My mother had believed in him. Enough to let him take me in her place. Enough to trust him. Maybe I could trust him too. Not with love. Not yet. But maybe with time. At the very edge of sleep, I heard his voice outside the door. Low. Measured. Controlled. Tomorrow. We'll start the process of transferring the deed. Your mother's care will be moved to a private facility. I've signed everything. Pause. You don't owe me anything. Except your presence. The footsteps faded, but the letter stayed in my hand all night. There were 15 doors between my bedroom and his. Not that I counted the first night, but by the third, I'd memorized the rhythm of the walk. Right turn at the white lacquered piano no one played. Left past the hallway of oil paintings I didn't recognize. Past the gold-framed mirror that reflected a girl I still hadn't become. Jonathan Hale lived on the opposite wing of the house. I was allowed to go anywhere. That was the point, wasn't it? No cage, just space. Cold, polite, and cavernous. He made no rules, but he also made no invitations. Most days, I stayed in my wing. I read. I helped the housekeeper fold sheets. I cooked breakfast for myself because no one asked if I wanted anything else. At 8 a.m. sharp, Jonathan left for the city in a silver car driven by a man named Ellis, who never smiled. At 7 p.m., he returned. Sometimes with a briefcase, sometimes with nothing at all. Always alone. I heard him before I ever really saw him. His footsteps across the marble, the soft click of his study door, the whisper of a match lighting his evening fire. One afternoon, I found my mother's scarf in my suitcase, still carrying the faint scent of eucalyptus. She used to wear it in the kitchen, humming that old French lullaby, her voice a gentle rustle beneath the clang of pots. Mon petit oiseau, dors bien ce soir. I missed her so much my chest ached. But it wasn't just her illness or the distance. It was the fact that I didn't know how to talk about her in this house. There were no spaces for stories here. Just marble and silence until Tuesday. That morning, the hospital called. My mother's oxygen levels had dropped overnight. The nurse said it calmly, professionally, like someone used to delivering news wrapped in formal tones. I dressed quickly and took the car without asking. The drive was long. Traffic was thick. I hated every minute of it. But when I arrived, she was smiling. She's stable, the nurse said. Actually, her care plan was just upgraded this morning. Private suite, 24-hour monitoring, full cardiac support. Someone arranged it. I blinked. I didn't, she smiled. Mr. Hale did, 2 weeks ago. I didn't speak for a full minute. He'd done this, quietly, before we were even married, without a word. I stood at the foot of my mother's bed and realized I didn't know the man I married at all. That night, I returned home later than usual. The sky had turned to slate, clouds pressing low and close, like thoughts too heavy to say aloud. I walked into the kitchen, more from instinct than hunger. To my surprise, the kettle was already whistling. Jonathan stood at the stove. He didn't turn around. You looked tired at the hospital. I froze. You were there? I stopped by, briefly. He poured water into a teacup, his movements precise, almost ceremonial. I didn't want to interrupt. He handed me the cup. I took it carefully, The porcelain was warm against my palms. Chamomile, my mother's favorite. We stood in silence for a while. Then softly I said, "Why didn't you tell me you did that?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze was on the steam rising from his own cup. Finally, "I don't like making people feel like they owe me. But I do owe you," I whispered. He looked at me then, directly. No steel, no frost. Just quiet. "No, Clara. Your family helped me once. I'm simply returning the balance." Later that night, I sat by the fireplace in the library. A place I didn't even know existed until earlier that day. It was tucked behind a hidden panel in the wall, probably designed for cigars and secrecy. But the chairs were soft. The books smelled like stories. And for the first time since I arrived, I felt a sliver of belonging. On the side table, someone had placed a small record player. I lifted the needle and played the first vinyl I could find. A piano piece. Gentle. Melancholy. Notes floated like snow in a room built for winter. And that's when I saw him again. Jonathan stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, as if unsure whether to step in or vanish. "I didn't know you liked music," he said. "I didn't know you kept pianos you never touch," I replied. He smiled. Barely. Then, like a man afraid of breaking something sacred, he walked in, slowly, and sat across from me. "Why me?" I asked suddenly. "Out of all the women in New York you could have married to settle a debt." His answer came without hesitation. "Because I didn't want someone who would pretend." I swallowed. The fire crackled between us. "You don't know me," I said. "No," he agreed. "But I'd like to." I don't remember how long we sat there. Maybe an hour, maybe less. But it was the first time the distance between us wasn't measured in doors, but in breath. And that night, I didn't feel traded. I felt seen. The third week of our marriage began with rain, not the kind that drums on rooftops or shouts through windows, but the soft, steady kind. The kind that soaks in slow through soil and silence. The kind that makes you remember things. That morning, I couldn't sleep. The house was too still. I wandered barefoot to the east side of the mansion, where the light was softer, the furniture less touched. I paused outside what I thought was another storage room. The door creaked. Inside, a narrow room lined with books, and at the very end, a writing desk. On it sat a familiar wooden box. Not the one my mother gave me for the wedding, but older, scratched, bearing a brass clasp shaped like an ivy leaf. I'd seen it once, long ago, tucked on the top shelf of our Brooklyn apartment. Always locked, always out of reach. I don't know why I opened it, or maybe I do, because some part of me, deep down, had already begun to suspect that I'd missed something. Something about Jonathan, something about how this all began. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, neatly tied with faded ribbon, yellowing at the corners. Each one addressed to a name I hadn't heard in years. To Miss Ruth Lynn, Brooklyn, NY, my mother. From J. Hale. I sat down slowly, careful not to breathe too hard. The first letter was dated 1998. The year my mother began volunteering at the church literacy center. The year I turned 7. The year she first brought home a boy with quiet eyes and holes in his shoes, and a voice so soft, we all leaned in to hear him. I remembered him now. His name was Jonah then, not Jonathan. He never said much, but he read every book she gave him, cover to cover. He used to sit on our fire escape, turning pages like they were keys. My mother would make him lentil soup and send him home with old sweaters. The letter said, "Miss Lynn, you said one day I would be in a place to help someone, and I should. I didn't believe you then, but I do now. I'm 17. I got a full scholarship. I'll never forget what you taught me. That kindness isn't a weakness, It's a direction. Someday I'll repay it. I promise. Jonah, I read every word, every date, every vow. He wrote once a year. Sometimes just to say thank you. Sometimes to say he had nothing to report, but he hadn't forgotten. The handwriting grew more refined over time. The last letter was from 2 years ago. It simply read, "I'm almost ready. I hope Clara's still painting." I covered my mouth with both hands. I hadn't painted in years. Not since the week my father left and took every brush I owned with him. But somehow, he remembered. That evening, I waited in the library. Jonathan arrived later than usual, tie loosened, sleeves rolled. When he saw me sitting by the fireplace, he paused. He looked tired, but not surprised. "You found them," he said quietly. I nodded. His jaw clenched. "I didn't mean to." He shook his head. "You were always meant to. Eventually." I held up one letter. The ink smudged slightly. From the years. "Why didn't you tell me you knew my mother? That you'd been in our home?" He took a breath. "Because I didn't want this marriage to feel like a transaction." "But it was," I said softly. His gaze didn't waver. "Not to me." There was a long silence. Then, finally, he sat across from me. Not the way a CEO does in meetings, but the way someone sits when they know they've been seen for real and they can't undo it. "My parents died when I was 12, he said. "Nobody in my family took me in. I slept in shelters, rode trains all night. Your mother, she didn't ask me for proof. She gave me soup and a place to read. She treated me like a boy, not a burden." He stared into the fire, as if waiting for it to judge him. "She saved me. I spent half my life climbing high enough to be able to repay that. And so you married me," I whispered. "No," he said. "I married you because I watched you grow up from afar. Because I saw what you gave up for your family. Because I knew. You were the only person who wouldn't want anything from me." My throat tightened. "And what do you want from me?" I asked. He met my eyes. "Nothing. Except the chance to do something right." Later that night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time I didn't pace. I didn't count doors. I sat on the window seat of my room and watched the rain bead down, the glass like tears too tired to fall. In my lap lay the oldest letter, still creased, still brave. My mother had believed in him when no one else had. And now he believed in me. Not because I was his wife, but because I was hers. The first time I knocked on his door, I didn't expect to stay. It was late. The house had gone still, like it always did after midnight, quiet in a way that made you notice the ticking of the grandfather clock down the hall, or the creak of old wood beneath bare feet. I had stood in the hallway for 20 minutes before I raised my hand. I wasn't dressed for anything other than sleep. An old cardigan over. A cotton slip, sleeves tugged low past my wrists like I could disappear inside them. But something had shifted in me since I read those letters. A line had been crossed, not in anger or fear, but in understanding. And sometimes understanding is more intimate than desire. The door opened on the first knock. Jonathan stood there, barefoot, wearing a dark t-shirt and flannel pants, his hair slightly mussed from running fingers through it. He looked at me like I wasn't supposed to be real. Like maybe he had imagined the idea of me showing up like this, uncertain and sure all at once. "I couldn't sleep," I said. He stepped aside without a word. The room smelled like cedar and ink. His study, yes, but also the place he sometimes slept when he didn't want to feel like a husband. There was a fire burning low in the hearth, casting gold shadows across the dark oak walls. A book lay open on the leather armchair. I walked past it, sat at the edge of the couch, unsure of my place here. Jonathan stood across from me, one hand still resting on the doorknob. "I'm not here because I think I have to be," I said quietly, "and I don't expect anything from you." He didn't move. I paused. I want to stop being afraid of this house, of us, of you. That last word came out softer than I meant it to, almost like a confession. He let go of the doorknob, walked toward me, slow, like a man approaching something fragile, not because it might break, but because it already had. When he reached me, he didn't sit. He knelt, right there, on the floor, in front of me. His hands didn't touch me, but his eyes did. "I've tried to give you space," he said, "because I didn't want to be another man who took something from you." "You didn't," I said. "You gave me my mother's life back." He looked away for a moment. Then back. "Can I touch you now?" I nodded, and when his hands reached for mine, they were warm, warmer than I'd expected. Rougher, too. Not the hands of a man who lived behind desks and signatures, but the hands of someone who had held hunger, fear, hope. He lifted one hand to my face. His thumb traced my cheekbone with such care that I wanted to cry. "You don't have to be gentle," I whispered. He looked at me for a long time. "I want to be," he said. "Because you deserve gentleness more than anyone I've ever known." The first time, we barely made it to the bed. He kissed me like he wasn't sure the world would let him do it again. Like the permission I gave him might be revoked at any second. My cardigan slipped from my shoulders. His fingers trembled as he traced the curve of my spine, like reading, something sacred. We moved slowly, as if neither of us wanted to wake the silence we'd lived in too long. And when it was over, he held me. No words, just breath. His and mine, tangled like roots under soil. The second time, I touched him first. We had barely shifted positions, still skin to skin, my head on his chest, his fingers combing through my hair like a rhythm he'd always known. I lifted myself up, kissed the hollow of his throat, then his jaw, then the corner of his mouth. This time, he let himself surrender. Not to lust, but to being wanted. His voice broke in my ear. I didn't know what it meant to be chosen. Until now, the third time was quiet, no urgency, no searching, just stillness. We faced each other in the dark, our legs tangled, hands clasped between us. I looked at him, not at his features, but at what lived behind them. He wasn't beautiful in the way magazines paint men, but in that moment, he was the most human face I'd ever seen. I rested my forehead against his. "You don't owe me anything either," I said. His breath caught. "Then let me give you everything," he answered. We fell asleep with the windows open. The fire had burned, down to glowing embers. The night air touched our skin, but we were warm, wrapped in nothing more than each other's presence, each other's weight. It didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like finally arriving somewhere I hadn't even realized I'd been walking, toward my whole life. The letter came on a Thursday. It wasn't addressed in handwriting I knew, but the postmark, Chicago, and the initials scribbled in the corner made something twist in my stomach. R.L. Raymond Lynn. My father. I hadn't seen him in nearly 8 years, not since he walked out with a suitcase and a muttered apology he couldn't look in the eye. He left us with unpaid rent, hospital bills, and silence. My mother never said a bitter word about him, not once, but silence can be louder than anger. The I. Letter was brief. "Clara, I'm coming to New York. I'd like to see you. And Ruth, if she'll allow it. I'm sorry. Dad, no return address, no phone number, just a date. Tomorrow. I didn't tell Jonathan that night. I needed time to sort through the knots in my own chest first, but he noticed something had shifted. We were in the kitchen. Yes, his kitchen now, but we'd made it ours in little ways. My tea tins in the corner cabinet, his cufflinks in the fruit bowl for some reason. Neither of us explained. I was slicing pears for a tart. He stood beside me, peeling apples with a knife like he'd done it his whole life. "You're quiet," he said softly. I got a letter. He didn't press. He just waited. I handed him the paper. He read it, folded it, placed it on the counter. Then he said something I didn't expect. If you want me to leave tomorrow when he comes, I will. The next day, my father showed up in a gray coat that didn't fit. His face was thinner, his hands older, but it was still him. The same slope of his shoulders, the same downward glance when he didn't know how to start. I met him at the garden entrance, where the air still smelled faintly of the last lilacs and Jonathan's cedarwood aftershave from the morning. He looked up. You've grown. You've been gone, I replied. He nodded. I deserved that. I didn't answer. He glanced at the house. So this is where he lives? Yes. I heard about the wedding, through a friend of a friend. I'm not here for money. I needed to see her. She's sleeping, I said. I'll wait. We sat on the stone bench by the fountain. He picked at his gloves, the silence hanging between us like wet clothes too heavy to lift. I'm sorry, Clara, he said, for what I did, for not staying, for not being stronger. My hands curled into fists in my lap. You didn't just leave us. You left her to explain why, and you left me to hold the weight. I know. No, I snapped, then softened. No, I don't think you do. He nodded again. I don't, but I want to, if you'll let me. We sat there for a long time. Then he asked to see her. I hesitated, then led him inside. My mother was in the reading room, wrapped in her favorite quilt, her breathing soft, book resting on her lap. She opened her eyes when we entered, and then she saw him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then she said simply, You're late. He broke. Tears filled his eyes, and he dropped to his knees beside her chair like a man at confession. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know, she said, and that was it. She reached for his hand, and just like that, a bridge was built. Not over the pain, but through it. That night I found Jonathan in the library, his sleeves rolled, glasses low on his nose. He was reading one of the letters he'd once sent my mother. I didn't expect him to come, I said. He looked up. And now that he has? I sat beside him. Not angry, not forgiven, just tired. He reached for my hand. You don't have to forgive him tonight. I nodded. But I think I will. Eventually. Before bed, I passed by my mother's room. She was already asleep. My father curled in a chair nearby, arms crossed over his chest, like he didn't trust sleep to keep him there. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Then I went to our room, mine and Jonathan's, and found the lamp. Already dimmed, the window cracked open to the soft autumn air. He was waiting. I climbed into bed beside him. Not as someone rescued, not as someone owned, but as someone who had survived something hard and still chose love. It started with something small. A dropped fork. A clipped sentence. My father asking if he could stay longer than a few days. My mother saying yes too quickly. The feeling grew like a draft under a door. Subtle, but constant. I couldn't sleep. I flinched when Jonathan brushed my back in passing. I started folding napkins too tightly. Started putting space between our bodies again at night, not because I didn't love him, but because now, for the first time, I did. And love, real love, asked for things I wasn't sure I could give. Trust, presence. The terrifying promise that if I stayed, I could be hurt. Again, we fought on a Tuesday. The sky was overcast. The kind of gray that makes everything feel suspended. Jonathan had spent the morning on the phone, speaking in clipped tones, the old version of him bleeding through. I asked if he was okay. He said he was fine. Then I asked, again. He looked up sharply. Clara, not everything needs to be unpacked. I stepped back. I'm not trying to unpack you. I'm trying to be part of you. The silence afterward felt final. I left the room before I could say something cruel. By evening, the house was too quiet. My mother and father had gone out for a walk. Jonathan hadn't come out of his study. I packed a small overnight bag. Nothing. Dramatic. No slammed doors or dramatic notes. Just socks, a sweater, a single book I never finished. The sky opened as I stepped outside. Rain, heavy, immediate, drenching. I didn't take a car. I walked. My old apartment was 20 blocks away, still empty, still holding shadows and chipped windowsills and the ghost of who I used to be. I didn't expect him to come. I hadn't left a note. Hadn't looked back. But just past midnight, I heard the buzzer ring. Once. Then again. When I opened the door, he was standing there, soaked to the skin. No umbrella. No coat. Just a man in a cotton dress shirt clinging to him like memory. He didn't speak right away. I didn't ask why he was there. Rain dripped from his cuffs. His eyes were darker than I'd ever seen them, not angry, just wide open. No defenses. No polished edge. Don't run from this, he said, voice raw. I wasn't running from you. He stepped forward. You were running from what I make you feel. That undid me. I looked down. It's easier when it's duty, Jonathan, when it's survival, when it's about saving someone else. He didn't argue, so I kept going. But this, what we've become, it's not about my mother anymore, or the contract. It's about us, and that scares me more than anything ever has. He nodded. Me too, he said. You think I don't wake up terrified? You think I don't still carry the boy who had nothing in his pockets but promises he couldn't keep? He stepped closer. And then, slowly, as if to let me walk away, he knelt. Right there, on the hallway floor of my old building, rain dripping down his neck, his hands open at his sides. I came here because I'm not asking you to choose me out of debt, he said. I'm asking you to choose me because without you, all of this, everything I've built, means nothing. I knelt too. We sat there, soaked and shaking. I took his face in my hands. His beard was rough against my palms. His lips parted slightly, not in invitation, but in surrender. I don't know how to promise forever, I whispered. You don't have to, he replied. Just promise me tomorrow, and we'll keep going from there. We kissed in the stairwell, not the first kiss, not the hottest, but the one that said, you're the home I didn't know I'd been building toward. Later, back in the apartment, we changed into dry clothes. I wrapped us in the same quilt I used when winters got cruel. We didn't talk much. We just lay there, our legs tangled, our hands resting on each other like anchors. Rain tapped the windows like forgiveness. He fell asleep with his head on my shoulder, and I stared at the ceiling, realizing that this quiet, this stillness, this messy, fragile, ordinary closeness was the first time I felt married. Not legally, but truly. We came home quietly. No grand return. No apologies announced to the walls, just the creak of the front door and the soft clack of shoes left by the rug. The house was still. Late autumn sunlight poured through the windows like honey, slow and golden, warming corners that had once felt cold. Jonathan set down my overnight bag and didn't ask where I wanted to go. Instead, he led me to the kitchen. Hungry? I nodded. But not for food. He didn't answer. Just opened a drawer, took out the old cast-iron skillet, and began to make eggs the way I'd once told him my mother did. Over low heat, a dash of milk stirred with a wooden spoon. I sat at the counter, watching him move. There was no hurry, no tension. Just the sound of the burner ticking softly beneath the pan and the light tapping of a spoon against ceramic. And somehow, that was everything. That week, we began again. Not with some dramatic vow or sweeping change, but with small things. We moved our clothes into one closet. We chose a new kettle together. We argued over jam flavors at the grocery store and ended up buying both. He started leaving his watch on my nightstand. I started leaving notes in his jacket pocket. Nothing fancy, just things like breathe or your mother would be proud. We didn't talk about love. We practiced it. Every morning, I brought my mother tea. Now that her heart was stronger, she'd taken to reading again. Big novels with soft spines and dog-eared corners. She never mentioned the day my father came back, but sometimes I caught her glancing out the window a little longer, or folding his shirts with a softness that felt new. He stayed. Quietly. Tentatively. But he stayed. One morning, while I brewed, chamomile. Jonathan walked in, his sleeves already rolled, his hair damp from a shower. He picked up a second mug. "I'll bring her the tray," he said. I handed it to him without a word. And that moment, watching him balance the tray, careful not to spill, stepping slowly down the hall like it mattered, that was when I knew he didn't need to say anything more. He loved not through speeches, but through presence. That afternoon, we sat in the sunroom. Jonathan had his laptop open, half reading, half watching me sketch. I hadn't picked up a pencil in years. But something inside me stirred now. Not ambition, not escape. Just the simple act of tracing lines that had no destination. He looked up. "What are you drawing?" "Us," I said, not looking away from the paper. But not our faces, just the space between us. He set the laptop aside, moved closer. "And what does it look like?" I showed him the page. There was no detail. Just two figures sitting side by side, knees touching, heads leaned together. The space between them filled with light. "It looks like home," he said. That night, my mother called me into her room. She sat in her rocking chair, the quilt I made for her draped over her legs. Her eyes were sharp in a way I hadn't seen since before the surgeries. "You love him," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. She looked away, out toward the maple trees turning rust and gold in the yard. Then she said something I'd remember forever. "You chose a man like me. Strong on the outside, afraid to be known. But you made a better ending than I did." She turned back to me. "Hold it gently, Clara. The best love is always the kind that startles you when it stays." Later that night, I lay next to Jonathan in bed, our fingers loosely laced between us. The lamp glowed beside us, soft and amber, like the last light before sleep. I turned to him. "Do you ever think about what we were before?" He smiled, slightly. "Contracts, conditions, distance. And now?" He turned off the lamp. In the dark, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Now we're just two people who kept showing up. That was the night I stopped measuring love by what it said and started trusting what it did. The first snow came quietly, just a dusting, a soft whisper across the lawn, frosting the garden stones, gathering on the iron bench outside the library window. I watched it fall with a cup of tea in my hands, wrapped in the old cardigan Jonathan now called my armor. The house felt different now, not larger or smaller, not louder or quieter, just lived in, filled, like all the invisible corners, had been touched by something warm. It had been nearly 6 months since our wedding, 3 since I had run into the rain, and not a single day had passed since then, where we didn't find some way to choose each other again. My mother was stronger, now. She walked without the cane. She spent her mornings reading in the sunroom, and her afternoons watering the plants no one else remembered to care for. My father stayed too. He never asked for forgiveness again. He just woke up early, made breakfast, fixed broken things, loose cabinets, sticking windows, creaky chairs. He didn't try to be the father he hadn't been. He just became the man he wanted to be now, and in that quiet, steady way, he returned to us. That morning, I found Jonathan in the greenhouse. He had dirt on his forearm and a trowel in his hand. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbows, and he was trying, and failing, to repot a rosemary bush. "You're brutalizing that poor plant," I said, laughing. He looked up, a smear of soil across his cheek. "It's not cooperating." I took the trowel from him. "Let me." He stepped back, watched me work, and after a moment said, "You look like your mother when you concentrate." I glanced at him. "Is that a compliment?" He smiled. "It's everything." Later that evening, I walked into the study to find a small box on the desk, not gift-wrapped, just simply placed there, as if it had always belonged. Inside, a silver ring, delicate, understated, set with a single small opal, not flashy but luminous in a quiet way. Like moonlight caught in a stone. I turned to him. He leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. "No proposal," he said. "No pressure. We're already married." "Then why the ring?" He walked toward me. "Because I want you to have something that wasn't part of the contract. Something that means only one thing. I love you. And I'm not going anywhere." I slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. That night, we had dinner by the fireplace. Just the two of us. No formalities, no guests. Just soup, crusty bread, and candlelight. We didn't say much. But when he reached across the table and took my hand, I didn't flinch. Because this time, I wasn't a girl trading herself for safety. I was a woman choosing a man who had chosen me right back. After dinner, we sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, the sky full of stars and quiet. "Do you ever think about the beginning?" I asked. He nodded. "I try not to. Not because it wasn't real, but because this, now, is what matters." I leaned against him. We were strangers tied by circumstance. He kissed the top of my head. Now we're partners held by choice. Inside, my mother played a slow tune on the piano, something from long ago, half lullaby, half memory. My father stood beside her, humming softly. The sound wrapped through the house like ribbon, tying us all together again. Not perfectly, but, honestly, before we went to bed, I wrote a letter. Not to anyone living, just to the part of me that used to be afraid. "Dear Clara, you did not disappear. You became. You are not owed. You are loved. You are not rescued. You are home. Yours, always." I folded it, placed it in the wooden box beside the letters from Jonathan, and closed the lid. We fell asleep in each other's arms that night. No need to say the words again, because they were written in the way he curled around me like a promise, in the steady rhythm of his breath at my neck, in the way our hands found each other under the covers, not gripping, not holding tight, just resting there, like something we'd always meant to find. If this story touched your heart, please consider giving it a like. It truly helps more people find moments like this. And if you'd like to hear more quiet, meaningful stories just like this one, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for spending your time here.